He more or less has to be at this point. We are now live, and we are midway through a discussion of one of the most crazy Reddit posts any of us have ever seen, where a guy talks about the 155 tabletop projects that he has backed, and they only date as far back as This War of Mine, basically. That's one of the first ones. Santorini, Outlive.
I mean, I backed like the original like Alien Frontiers on there, and I don't think I've backed near that many.
No, he's got 155 projects. So a gentleman posted on Reddit that he doesn't like Kickstarter, and I honestly think, like, looking at all this stuff that he is so upset about, like, I mean, it looks like he just went in with the attitude that he would back everything. And of course, if you're backing absolutely everything, like, you're going to get some duds, and
that's not Kickstarter's fault. That's your self-control's fault.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, a lot of times even the project creators understand that the product they're giving to you or they're selling is not so much about necessarily gameplay as much as it is about other aspects of the hobby. I mean, there's a lot of miniatures projects on here, and if that's not your thing, then why are you spending $331 on the Walking Dead all-out miniatures war game?
Get on board the hype train.
Yeah, he spent $275 on One Night Ultimate Alien. Like, there shouldn't even be a pledge level for that. That must include it includes
probably all the one night games and like the collector box and like
Meeple, some sort of Meeple Source, Meeple Realty, one of those.
You probably get a Skype with Ted Allspock and play a game of it or something. He signs each of your boxes.
At some point, there's just a level where like real aliens come to your game day.
Yeah. I mean, as many times as I feel like I've made mistakes on Kickstarter necessarily, I feel like for the most part I understood what I was getting. And there's only been a few of them that I've really like gotten and been like, oh, this was a real disappointment. I thought I was going to get something else. I think one of them was The Martians: A Story of Civilization. Not the Robinson Crusoe one, but the other Martians: A Story of Civilization, because that was probably the worst rulebook I've ever read. When I finally finished it. Oh, seriously, it was so bad, Andy. Like, you have no idea. Like, I know that you're laughing because you've probably read some bad ones in your time. This is beyond that. This is like, I don't know. I mean, I guess it was in English. I don't think that it was just Google translated, but I also don't even have the slightest semblance of how the game really plays from that. And all I know is there was an awful much of a larger focus on like semi-cooperative play than I ever anticipated. And as a result, just fell out of favor for me right away.
Yeah. So that was one that, I don't know. When all the Mars games were coming out, I was looking at that one, and I think I might have been the only one I knew that was like, you know what? Nope.
I mean, it looks so cool. I mean, it looks so similar to the other stuff that was coming out. I mean, I don't know. Just looking down the list, like, it does look like he just shotgun approach anything that said tabletop, and very much like, yeah, this is not Kickstarter's fault. Like you said, this is your fault. Like, there's some really good things that come by Kickstarter. So I don't know. I just think just because one silly person has no self-control doesn't mean that we shouldn't have nice things.
I mean, Kickstarter is part of my hobby budget. I have a monthly hobby budget. I keep track of what I spend. And I have a fair amount of disposable income, so...
Oh, not to toot my own horn or anything, but yeah.
Well, I mean, like, I do, but even, like, that's just... I can't even... That's just, like... It's on Kickstarter, so I'll back it. It's... I guess I don't even get it. I don't know.
You would have better luck had you just, like, shotgunned a game store. Like, I'm going to buy everything on the shelves. You would have ended up with, like, better games than
I would be happier with my game collection if I went to Mayhem and stripped their shelves.
Yeah.
Like,
well, he does have Hannibal and Hamilcar. Like, this guy he's complaining, but, like, he's also factoring in so many games. like it looks to me like he's only really been on Kickstarter for about a year, maybe a year and a half, because the first thing that he has on his list is Xenoshift Dreadmire. And I just received Xenoshift Dreadmire. So I mean, literally, like he's, that just came in like a few months ago. And I mean, I was able to take the Xenoshift Dreadmire Kickstarter exclusives alone and trade them for games that I was interested in, aka Modern Art and a few others, expansions to games that I was more interested in, to what I would consider to be about the value of the stuff that I was left with. So, I mean, like that's what I think of when I think of Kickstarter. It's like, as long as it's a halfway decent game, there's going to be somewhat of a market for the Kickstarter exclusives in some cases. Or if it just looks like it's going to be a good game, you have the game, period. And that's, that's how I don't see how that's that much different, especially when usually even in those situations, the halfway decent games have some sort of an incentive to people who have just backed it. And if they don't, well, it's your fault for backing a Queen Kickstarter. I need to go turn off my dehumidifier. I can hear that in the background.
Dehumidifier.
I'm going to finally retire the Ladies of Troyes in German and then now replace it with the strangely, like, I swear I didn't think that it would be different, but like the texture of the box is different. The color scheme is different. Like the German version is much more purple. The English one is more brown. Big moments for me, guys. I got my Ladies of Troyes in English. And you have this too, Trent.
Yep.
Kind of an interesting thing when they just, on the back of the box, it just kind of has like almost like the PNP files for the box just all included on the back, right?
Yeah, kind of.
So we are at some point going to have to start this episode, and I think now seems about as good a time as any. Are you guys cool with that?
Nope.
No.
All right, well, I will have a glass of water while you guys continue this discussion. 3, 2, 1. Hello and welcome to The Good, the Bored, and the Ugly, a podcast about board games. I'm your host, Joe Sallin. Tonight I'm joined by
Andrew Dennison.
Have we started recording yet?
Yes.
Yeah, we're broadcasting. Trent.
Trent
That's
Ham.
Trent Ham. Yeah, and we just kind of soft introed into this episode, so I don't know how much of that Josh is going to keep. But anyway, it's
I'm sure he'll keep all of it. Anything that makes us look like winners, he'll keep.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Absolutely. Really makes me look like winner there. It's good to be back with you guys. It's good to be back. It's good to be back for another episode. This one, number 131. Tonight's topic will be about evocative mechanisms in board game, which I have given a short title of The Feels. So we're going to be talking about when is it that a game's mechanism is able to specifically evoke a certain theme. And we'll be getting to that as soon as we get done reviewing games, which we each have our own game picked out to review. If you've never joined us before, welcome. And at the end of the podcast, for those of you that are new, you know that we hype. Well, you should know that we hype games on our way out the door. Those of you that have listened to us before probably already know these things. Before we get kicked off, I want to remind everybody listening to this today that we really appreciate your listenership, and we would love to hear more from you and just be able to, keep you more in tune with what's going on in The Good, the Bored, and the Ugly, and a few other different little side projects that I've got going. And also Andy has got a little side project in terms of this YouTube video reviews that we started doing. So you can check us out on YouTube. The Good, the Bored, and the Ugly is our channel. You can also look on Board Game Geek. Our Board Game Geek Guild is number 2173. The Good, the Bored, and the Ugly will be available to you there. Check us out on Twitter. Check us out on Facebook. The Facebook page kind of gets updated. I actually should probably at some point post the link to this episode on the Facebook page, but it seems like some of the other ways that we're getting out there seem to be more successful than that right now. But anyway, if you really like Facebook and you want to see more there, then, well, hey, you should go check us out and absolutely let me know. Seek me out on Facebook and say that. Anyway, by Game Surplus, they are an online game store. They are not specifically affiliated with any board game that would give us a bias. However, if you buy your games from Game Surplus, it shows that you love this podcast and that you'd like to see the people that are supporting us go further. The people that are supporting the good, the bored, and the ugly, as well as Silent Coefficient, my video review series, and the Longview podcast. Check them out at gamesurplus.com. They are an online game retailer that has the same sort of wonderful customer service you'd expect from a friendly local game store. So say hi to Carmen and Elaine.
Better than most, even.
Oh, dude, yeah, better than most is sure. Friendly local game stores are not always so friendly, but I can promise you that Carmen and Elaine will be wonderful human beings. They have always been wonderful human beings to me, and I hope that you will check them out so that you can find out that that's what they're all about. So, check them out at gamesurplus.com. And the final thing I'd like to say, guys, this has been a rough week for a lot of Americans. This has been a rough few weeks for a lot of Americans with this hurricane season just having so many big ups and big downs. The Good, the Bored, and the Ugly does not have a Patreon. We do not specifically ask anything of any of our listeners. That is something that we have not ever done. However, I am going to specifically ask something of you all. If you love this podcast, if you have ever considered that this podcast was ever worth you giving monetarily to it, I want you to funnel that into relief efforts for Hurricane Harvey and Hurricane Irma that have hit our southern portion, our Texas and our Florida listeners very, very hard. And I specifically, it came to my front door when I asked one of our podcast listeners, Murr, who has been present on the podcast when we've been live recording. He sent me a demo version of Seventh Continent to check it out, and I played it a little bit, and I sent him a little rundown of what my thoughts were on it, and I was like, "Hey, how's your campaign going?" And he texted me back, or he messaged me back, and he says, "Joe, I'm currently evacuated from my home. I can't play this game because I'm in a." He said he was kind of holed up for the hurricane. So anyway, it really came. I hope everything is the way that you said, Murray. He's in an area that did get hit quite hard, that really got rained on, kind of almost like the not so much the wind so much as it was the rain, kind of like what hit Houston. And I asked Murr specifically, "Hey, Murr, I want to know how it is that we can help out the cause. What should we give to?" And Murr said, "I think it's important to give." He thinks it's important to give to both Hurricane Harvey and Hurricane Irma victims, and that would be by donating to the Red Cross. So in a very roundabout way, the good, the bored, and the ugly, if you've ever thought about supporting us right now, funnel that support into the Red Cross. Please help these people from the United States in this case. And I know we have a lot of international listeners, but this is the type of disaster that could strike anybody, anywhere. And I just would really love if you would support our podcast by doing such a thing. So anyway, that's what I have to say for current events and everything, and for business. So I really hope to see the rebuilding go smoothly as possible. And I know that a lot of the damage isn't even totally done and been registered, especially in the Houston area with how much this just swamped them and a lot of inundated houses. And anyway, hopefully we'll be able to build back and be able to fix some of these issues that we've had and make sure that people aren't affected like this in the future. So anyway, heart goes out to you, and send your support that you would send to this podcast if you could to the Red Cross. All right, guys, that's a very somber note, but now let's go ahead and let's go back. I will just ease us back into the fact that we are going to be talking about board games for this episode by saying that today I had a game day at my high school where I had a very large showing of kids. It seems to be growing. I feel kind of like I got one class where it stuck just a little bit. It started to stick with them last year. And the kids that stuck last year have really just granted a lot of legitimacy, and we just seem to be ballooning up. I had about 30 kids in my room. I had student-led games of Snake Oil and Star Realms. I taught a game of junk art. I had video games going in the background, but most kids were not playing video games. They were playing board games because that video game system only supports 4 people, and we were able to get about 16, 20 people going at any one time with all the different games that people knew and could teach. And I was only a small part of that. Also played Between Two Cities, or Between Two Firms, as you like to call it, Trent, right?
Yes.
That went over quite well, though I had one student, strangely enough, a really good gamer, who kept on forgetting to play on the cities on his right and his left. He kept on playing 2 on his right or 2 on his left. It was just bizarre. It was like, why is that city smaller than all the other cities? You got to figure it out, but it's kind of funny that way. Got them all going in a game of Sheriff of Nottingham, which definitely works well with the type of gamers that I field at the game nights that I do. So among other games, very successful game nights, very, very heartwarming there. I feel like it takes a lot of effort. It takes a lot of my voice. My voice is actually kind of struggling. I've been drinking an awful lot of water, but yeah, it was really cool. So a big thing going on there for me, and so I can rest my voice for a minute. I would totally segue right into junk art because I've done a perfect segue here. Well, about as perfect as it gets, right, guys?
Until you described how it was a perfect segue.
Well, Andy, I'm describing it because I'm not going to be able to segue. My voice has already started cracking, and I need water, so I can't do it. I can't do it. I just can't talk about junk art right now. I seriously would get halfway through the description, and then my voice would be gone. So I need to save it as much as I can, and thus I'm going to instead kick it to the heaviest game that we have, which is going to be Trent, and I'm sure all of us are going to have some input. We were all in a game together of a prototype version of good old 18 Euro game. Trent, you kick it off and take it away.
Okay, I'm going to talk about City of the Big Shoulders. It's designed by Raymond Chandler III, which that may be a pseudonym for the author. I'm not really sure. There's a few designers out there that use pseudonyms, but I like Raymond Chandler, so we'll go.
I'm friends with him on Facebook, so I'm not sure. I think his name actually is Ray, and just
is he related to the Raymond Chandler that's like the really good author?
Oh, I never asked him.
That's what I was talking about, because Raymond Chandler is a well-known author.
Well, Trent, I'm illiterate, so I wouldn't know about those things.
Okay, that's an interesting direction to go.
It's a bad hobby, too. I have to have everybody read me things.
His most famous novel was The Big Sleep, which I read and really liked. If I thought more, I could think of more, but The Big Sleep came right to mind.
I've heard of that before.
Yeah, he wrote like detective novels, like noir detective novels back in like the 40s and 50s.
Yeah, it's starting to ring a bell.
Yeah,
not the same guy, obviously.
No, it might be like his grandson or something, though. I don't know. Anyway, way too much about the designer here in his name. We're talking about City of the Big Shoulders. It's a game that's going to be out late in 2018, it sounds like. It's going to theoretically have a Kickstarter sometime next year, or probably earlier in the year. It is a game that we played as a late prototype, the 3 of us, and I believe it has been played with others in our group at various points as well. It's basically a game that takes place in Chicago right after the Great Chicago Fire, when the city is rebuilding itself and kind of becoming the city that it became later on. It really takes place in the period between the Chicago Fire and the 1893 World's Fair. That seems to really be the period that the game focuses. It's where a lot of companies that we're familiar with today, like Kraft and Quaker Oats, took hold and started in Chicago during that time frame. It kind of became like a modern city during that time frame. So what this is really, it's like an 18xx game, and that you buy shares in various companies and so forth, and whoever has the most shares in a particular company is effectively operating that company. But it adds in worker placement that's very much like a worker placement game. That's what it really feels like, except that there are only a few standard worker placement spots on the board, and as the game progresses over 5 rounds, the players are effectively choosing which worker placement spots get added to the board. Now, they're not radically different, but they have themes, and which ones get chosen by the players change what's available quite a bit in the game. It's going to steer the way the game goes. Some games might be advancing down one path, depending on what's chosen. Some games might go in a completely different direction based on what's chosen. It's fairly complicated. It's fairly complex, but I think anyone who's ever played like a medium weight worker placement game and has ever played anything approaching an 18xx game would be completely fine at home with this. I know I was on the first play. Almost everything made intuitive sense because it's really a mix of those two. And I gotta say, honestly, I loved it. It was I really thoroughly enjoyed my play of this game. I want to play it again. I'm excited to play it again. Unless the game shows to me some sort of dirty side that I am not detecting at all, I'm going to probably back it when it comes out. I'm not going to get into a long mechanical description of the game because I'd be here for 20 or 30 minutes and no one really wants to hear that. Suffice it to say, I'm going to sum it up with this. If you like medium to heavyweight worker placement games, think like Agricola or something like that, and you have any interest in 18xx games, you probably will like City of the Big Shoulders. In fact, I pretty much guarantee you'd like it. I'm very excited to see this in its final form because, like I said, we're playing a late prototype. There are a few little wishy-washy corner areas of the rules that weren't real clear. We literally got a clarification from the designer on one thing as we were playing it. But it's a real solid game. It's a game that it's one of those games that I wanted to play again as soon as we were done. And it's also a game that hold on just a second. What?
All right. It's a game that me and Andy can definitely comment on for a moment while we pass this ball here. You know, just a little bit of an anticipated moment. So, Andy, we were playing on your beautiful prototype. Why don't you just tell people about all the different things you did for this prototype?
Oh, yeah. Well, I went overboard in my lovely
all right, bye.
print and play thing, but basically I printed everything out on a color laser printer for labels and then mounted it all on chipboard.
Hi, I'm back. I had a family issue that I had to take care of really quick.
Oh, yeah.
I just asked Andy about the board or the entire print and play that he had made, which was what we were playing on.
Yeah, I think I'm pretty much guaranteed that I'll have carpal tunnel later in life after that.
Andy, there was definitely a limit to where like all of that work that you did, like so much of it was just amazing and totally paid off. Like as in terms of the specific company charters being on chipboard, that was awesome. The board being on chipboard, that's awesome. All the 3D printed things, that's awesome. It doesn't cost you your fingers later in life. But every single stock certificate, Andy, it's almost like you were like, wait a minute, this game doesn't have any track for me to have to cut. I need something that's going to make my fingers awful.
Yeah. I don't know. It's fun.
It does. I mean, most of the pieces in the game, I want to say every single piece that you had to cut was a square, though. And that's a little bit nicer, at least, to work with.
It didn't honestly take me as long as you would think. It was just...
No, there were, like, you did have to make those little, like, the square cut out of chipboard for the buildings and stuff. But once again, I think those were totally worth it. Like, those are chunky, it's functional. If it was just little pieces of cardstock, definitely not going to be as easy to manipulate as these ones were. We did not run into any component issues because of Andy's hard work.
Yep. No, that was kind of the goal. Plus, the Kickstarter was far enough off yet that I'm like, if I put a little effort into this, it'll get some use before it gets put away.
Oh, dude, at least another year before it even starts. And then, think about how many games do we even play a year after we've played them a lot. So anyway, very, very much going to be worth it, Andy. I do think this has a potential for being one of those, though, and I'll let Trent take it off for saying exactly why, because, Trent, I think one of the last things you said was just about how you had enjoyed it quite a bit, and we're saying, the interest, if you have any interest in 18xx and have a, penchant for Euro games, that this is kind of a direction you might head.
Yep, exactly. I mean, that sums it up. I think that anyone that likes worker placement games like Agricola, and anyone that likes 18xx games, especially if you've had an enjoyment of both, you'll like this game. I'm really impressed with it, even in a late prototype state. I will probably immediately back it as soon as I can.
That's strong right there. That's high praise, I would think, especially considering that Trent has spent less on Kickstarter since backing like the original Kickstarter, as our early discussion that Dean and Jerry have both been participating here in our discussion here in our chat before we started this episode. You may have even heard, depending on what Josh included or not, that we were talking about the gentleman that spent $16,000 to $17,000 on Kickstarter in basically a year. And Trent's been on Kickstarter about since Alien Frontiers V1, which is what, like 2011, something like that, 2012.
I was on there looking at projects that weren't games even before then. So
sure, I see you back something every now and then. It's like something to do with organizing and things like that. And I'm like, oh, that's right. Trent actually uses Kickstarter like real people, not like me. So look for.
And I back a lot of projects at the $1 level just because I want to watch the conversation, and then sometimes I'll back out.
Mm-hmm.
It's just how I use it.
What I've done, I've burned myself on that, Trent. I've backed at the $1 level to be able to follow the designer, whatever the project creators input their messages, and then I'll forget to switch my pledge to an actual like pledge with the money level by the time the project ends, and I end up not actually backing it. So that happened a couple of times. So what I like to do is click that little save button, and then 48 hours before the Kickstarter ends, I'll really decide. I'll see, where the project stands right now, especially something like the Kickstarter projects that have been by shady companies that haven't exactly delivered on their previous Kickstarters, and people are starting to get a little stir crazy on when those are coming in. So it gives me a chance to really see how the community reacts to the Kickstarter first. So, but I definitely get like what you're doing, Trent. I think that that $1 level, just getting the line of communication started is quite a thing to do. So, Andy, any further comments about City of the Big Shoulders after this additional play that we had?
I really enjoyed the second game much better than the first, I think. Yeah, I mean, what we were playing was still kind of in the stage of a rough prototype, and definitely sort of rough a rough draft of the rules where it was kind of hard to figure out a few things. But the second game went a lot smoother. I still really enjoy it. There's a couple of things I'm still kind of teasing out with my head about it. But I would think, I don't know, like I was thinking about, because for me, tension in a game is usually like a critical factor of how much I'm going to enjoy it or not. And the tension in this game feels more like a Euro game tension to me, I guess. Like the tension of, oh my gosh, I hope they don't take that spot. Oh my gosh, can I get this bonus if they don't notice how I'm doing here? It's more of that level of tension. It's not like relating it to an 18xx game is somewhat accurate, but it would be one of the 18xx games where you can't really cut somebody off at the knees with stock selling and things like that.
Not with stock selling, but there's not every 18xx is about cutting off at the knees with stock selling.
Right, and that's what I mean though. Like the tension, there's a certain tension in economic games that can be much more fierce. And I was kind of comparing it in my head to how I feel when I play Arkwright, for example. And Arkwright has more this economic tension, give, pull, money, prices, whereas a lot of Euro games have the tension of don't get that spot before I do. That's crucial to my plan. And those feel a little bit different to me, and not that one's better than the other one, but I was just thinking about that yesterday.
I think that you're more predisposed for the Arkwright type, right?
Right. Overall, yeah, I prefer that level of tension where I can really affect somebody's game state. You can a little bit in City of the Big Shoulders, but there's like, I didn't feel like it was going to be possible to really muscle someone out of things completely. I
don't know if I would necessarily say that, Andy, because there was quite a bit of interesting happenings in our last round. Companies can really ramp up in their production and pretty much corner the market.
Mm-hmm.
Trent?
Yeah. I don't know what you're pointing at here. So,
Well, no, I'm specifically pointing at how in the last round you had a company that there was definitely room for you on the market. You were running companies, Trent, at I should say this, that we were kind of playtesting what I would like to think of as like an 18xx heavy gamer variant where companies act in the order that their appeal would dictate. But a player can choose not to act on behalf of a company. They have a certain amount of actions as a player. So they can choose to act on behalf of the company or pass their turn and wait till the next time they have a company that would act. Obviously, if you have one company, you're going to act every time you have a chance because you're going to want to take the spots that are on the board at that point. There's not really anything that that's going to get better if other players do it necessarily. So what happened in the last round there, Trent, was that you had a bunch of companies that were at the low end of the appeal, which helped you in terms of getting the jump on the actions before the board filled up. However, when it turned around and it was time to sell, it's kind of in power grid order. It feels like a little bit, except, well, not necessarily. No, not power grid order. The hit that you took that was taken by players with higher appeal in terms of waiting for their actions until later was somewhat balanced by the fact that they get to operate first. They get to fill demand first. They are guaranteed to be able to sell their goods. And you ended up with a bunch of companies' goods that weren't sold. Does that sound accurate?
Yes. I didn't account for the other player in the game like selling like 10 goods at once.
Yeah, what he did was he basically manned a bunch. He automated some parts of his factory. Actually, opened up a new factory of his company, I should say. That sounds a little confusing. You can actually add factories to your company. Your companies all start with like 2 separate factories that are unique in terms of what goods they require and how many workers they cost and how many goods they produce. But he opened up an extra factory, which then increased his production, and there was about room for maybe 15 total goods, and I think he sold like 11 of them, or 10 of them. And so Trent was stuck with a company that produced like 10 goods also, but wasn't able to sell most of them, right?
Yep, I was able to sell them, but I had to sell them at half price, basically.
That's right. Yeah, you can always sell them, but like half price is, yeah, it can be pretty painful.
Sure was.
Yeah, and that was interesting because I didn't see that coming at all, and I ended up benefiting vicariously because there was nobody else's stock that I could even buy except for that player that cut off Trent. So I ended up buying stock in his companies that ended up being like pretty much the best companies at the end of the game, and it was like, holy crap. And I won the game basically because my stock portfolio included his stock that I had no idea was going to blow up like it did. So it has the potential for double jumps in its stock market, kind of like in 1846. And at the time that I was playing at Origins, Ray was playtesting the potential for a triple jump. But I do agree with Andy to a certain extent. There's not going to be that same sort of cut off at the knees that if you're looking for an Arkwright. Honestly, that's what makes me not necessarily like this one more, but there's one specific cut off at the knees in Arkwright that I really never did enjoy. Even when I came around to appreciating a lot of the genius that is a part of Arkwright, and I do acknowledge there's some really cool stuff there. Whoever has the last action in the round just should guaranteed wait to use like a specific action that lets them price their goods to just undercut everybody else that's selling their goods. And I think that just in that aspect, whoever goes last gets to kind of, gets the last laugh in a sense. And I don't think that the way that the goods are sold is necessarily that interesting to me because of that. So I feel kind of like there's just nothing you can really do about it. You're just kind of sitting there like, oh, well, you weren't the guy who got last, which is the same way that I feel in an 18xx where the train rush is a big deal. It's like, well, one person was going to get screwed. It's you. So you're not always going to get screwed in City of the Big Shoulders. You can do things about it. There's 18xx's that are like that. 1846 is generally not like, oh, you're screwed. You can definitely get there.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think that's the thing with it is the tension in the game comes from the Euro game side of it, not the 18xx side of it. There's no rusting trains. There's no
there's no obsolescence. There's nothing in your factory that goes away. The only thing that could go away is the heavy gamer variant that we've not tried, which is the Great Depression.
Right. Well, and the other thing is it doesn't seem like there's ever a real good reason to dump stock in the game either. Like, you kind of invest in the companies you want to invest in, and then you buy it up and you keep going with it.
Yeah.
Like, I never felt a need to like ditch stock certificates to rebuy other ones.
Yeah, I definitely think that there should be at least some heavier rules, some variants. And I really think that with all the time that Ray is putting into developing this game and making sure it's going to be good before it kickstarts, I think there should definitely be some variants that include like shifting resources between companies, the ability to at least do that if players want that. I'm not saying that I necessarily want that, but I definitely think that your 18xx crowd, your 18xx faction is going to have a hard time warming up to see the big shoulders unless they can pull off some tricks that involve multiple company ownership and being able to sort of get into one company, get out of another one because of the actions you take. So I definitely see what you're saying there, Andy. So I guess there's a choice to make, but I honestly think we should all be able to have our cake and eat it too. There should be variants that allow for us to get what we want out of the game. And that would be what really makes it great, I think. Well, gee, that's City of the Big Shoulders. And now, Andy, could you please tell us a little bit about I can't believe how exciting this game was to me to finally get to play it. And you're going to be talking about it. You've played it more than I have. Tell us about this little Winsome on steroids, maybe.
Yeah, so I had a chance to play Mini Rails, which Trent picked up at Gen Con. And this is, a lot of people are saying it's the most Winsome-esque non-Winsome game, which I fully agree with as a statement. It's got that nice feeling of the players really deciding how the game's going to go. So you just get 2 actions every round, and that's either buying a disc for stock or laying a disc for track that's going to basically cost money or reduce the value of the stock in the game. And so you always have to make one of those decisions. You can't, take 2 of one or whatever. And so I found myself in very interesting situations where I had done something clever, I thought, with my rail action. And then I'm like, oh, crap, what stock? I don't even want any of these stock, but I have to take stock. So I have to deal with it. And then the other really fun part about it is, in order to actually score some of these stocks as positive or negative, because your stock can be dumbed down in a negative value, you got to get discs to, end the round. So when you take a pawn, you'll take a disc, you do something with it. Whatever color of disc is left goes down to the bottom. And those are the ones that are going to be the ones that score for you, in the sense that those are the ones that will score positive for you. If a disc doesn't get down there, then it's a problem. So you could have a lot of red discs in your stock track, but if you can't get a red disc, to be at the end of the round, that any of those positive ones you've got just fly off your board, and hey, look, they don't score for you at all. So this game is definitely my type of game. There's a lot of just like brinkmanship and just, hey, look, yeah, I don't have any great action for me, so I'm going to take a really bad action for you. There's a lot of like, cutting someone off, or hey, look, Trent has 3 gray positive shares. I'm going to take some actions to make sure that there's no way in hell he scores them at the end of the game. And that kind of thing is a lot of fun with it, but it's definitely like a Winsome game. It's very player driven. It's not scripted. And there's a lot of really, stabby knees and elbows kind of gameplay that comes along with this one. So it is I would rank it as a filler game, kind of a thinky filler. And I would say in that category, it's one of the best ones I've ever played. People say it's kind of like a step above Paris Connection or NCSF. I would agree with that, other than I also think that this one's probably a quicker play. Paris Connection could take a while to set up and deal with around. This one goes lickety split, and I think it's a really good, solid game for that. So this is one to keep your eyes out for and maybe pick up a copy of if you're interested in the kind of games where you could really, invite a lovely group of people over and then like stab them in the gut repeatedly as you destroy their value. So
cool.
Anyway,
well,
that's mini rails for me.
Any update from you, Trent?
I talked about it last time. My feelings are pretty much the same. I love it. It's one of my favorite fillers, period. I think it's a permanent addition to my collection. I can't see myself ever dropping it.
What surprised me about mini rails was how competent the production was. I think that the artwork and pieces were really great, and I just think I've kind of gotten used to winsome games that I've played having at least something about them that was very unappealing aesthetically. And that was, it's my own personal subjective views. But my main question is, guys, is mini rails the perfect winsome?
Well, it's not a winsome.
Yeah.
Let's take away the fact that it's not the winsome brand. Like, winsome games almost all deal with a abstracted form of dual ownership and railroads that generally are going to start at nothing and work their way towards a specific destination, but the players control kind of what direction they take and which of maybe multiple destinations they can take. It feels very much like a winsome. Would you guys agree with that?
It feels like I would say it feels like a winsome, but I can't classify it as the perfect winsome because a truly good winsome leaves you at the end wondering if you've actually just played a game or not.
Andy, what? This was some trolling comment about like the Pacific Northwest game that you guys played, didn't it?
Oh, no, there's a lot of winsome games. The thing with mini rails is I knew what I was doing at the end of the game and how I could do it better. And I think every winsome game I've ever played, at the end of it, I'm like, I have no freaking clue what the hell I've just done for the last hour.
Even Chicago Express and Paris Connection?
Oh, no, those have some deep ones. Yeah, like at the end of it, it's like, what could I do different next time? And you learn little tricks as you go with it. Like mini rails definitely has that winsome feel, but it's vastly more straightforward than a lot of the winsome games are.
It is, but it's vastly more variable as well because you're always going to be setting up this map. Like the map is easy to set up, but because of where things shake out to be and the fact that there's multiple sides to all the tiles in the game, like it's never going to be the same map that you're going to be setting up on. Every single railway is going to be affected by the placement of these tiles in a different way. And that to me means that you've got a dynamic map that's consistently going to be offering a new challenge. You've got the same sort of winsome tropes that you would expect in terms of getting stock in a company. But here, instead of wasting any time fumbling around with bills and coins and any sort of money, your stock starts at 0, and every time that your stock changes because of where the railway goes, which might cost it money or gain it money, you just go to like this +1 or -1, which to me is like, you buy it at 0. So it doesn't matter the value necessarily when you buy it, because when you buy it, you're paying that much for it. And the only thing that matters is where it goes from there, which to me is the idea of stock simplified to this absolute core of it, where everything that you get from the system is just about the choices that get made that impact the value of what has happened from the time that choice is made. Up to that time, I should say. Up to that time. Any decision from that point on should be impacted by all those decisions in the past. The only element really of randomness here that happens throughout the game is the fact that there's different stocks available every round. But there's way more there to consider than just, oh no, all of these came out right now, that means this is going to happen. No, it's not like that, because players draft those. Players take them as stock and do actions with them. So it to me, like, I don't like it in a winsome when I'm having to use my action to start an auction that I might not even get, and then use my action specifically towards a railway. I mean, that's, your action is a big resource. In this game, you are going to be using one action to get a stock and using one action to put that railway somewhere, to actually push it forward. And just everything about it seemed to me like the core of this system, like to me, the perfect winsome. And I know that's so strange. have to play it more and have to really flesh this out. But I thought, what a perfect game for my video review series, The Silent Coefficient. What a game that needs a bunch of attention.
I'd agree.
Okay. Wow, interesting, Trent, because I mean, I'm very much fawning over this game, and I know that's very rare that me and you actually find ourselves in agreement over something. Well, that's what I got to say about mini rails. So anyway, thank you very much, Andy, for telling us about mini rails and your several plays of it, and look forward to the future where I can maybe give it what it's due on the Silent Coefficient, my video review series, which you can find on YouTube. Now for my review here on this podcast, and my review this week specifically is going to be about junk art. Talking about City of the Big Shoulders and mini rails kind of just like wiped my mind. I had to pull up the outline here. But junk art to me seemed like a perfect thing to talk about today because I've now had several different experiences with several different groups of individuals in several different settings. And junk art is a game. It is mostly a dexterity game, but there's other elements that are present. And it really is almost a sandbox of a bunch of identical sets of pieces. There's 4 different identical sets of 15 different pieces. And these are all wooden pieces that are fairly large, chunky wooden pieces that are able to be stacked one on top of the other. And the idea is that you're going to be building a structure to try to stand either the tallest or just at least keep standing while everybody else's falls as they try to put pieces that cannot keep their structure standing. So anyway, there's many different ways that you can play this game. And that is one of the first things you'll realize about junk art. It is very much a game system and not a game, but you're buying the whole system. And the developers have given you quite a bit of things you can play around with here in the box. They themselves have delivered either about 10 or 11 different game types that do feel meaningfully different. Some of them feel very similar to one another with slight rules changes, but you run the gamut of building a structure as high as you can with fairly well-deterministic pieces that you're going to get, you know, where it's mainly just about trying to balance the structure and take your time and build as best you can. And then there's a game that's, you know, about each person getting their own personal deck of cards, shuffling them, flipping a card off the top, and then you have all the pieces shuffled in the middle. You race to find that one and then slap it onto your base as quick as you can and shout done. And the last person left in the round does not get to place that piece. At the end of the round, you will give points based on whoever's been able to stack the most pieces. So every time you've not been able to place a piece, you have lost the ability to score points for that round. It is very much different in that game than it is in the first one that I described. And also, probably my favorite, and also happens to be the first time I ever played this at a convention on a jumbo size. I played the Montreal version where you actually play cards on your opponent to your left or right. You play these cards that all represent a piece. So you're basically getting to cherry pick the most difficult pieces for your opponent. But here's the catch. Every 3 cards, you will take over the opponent you've been giving cards to's stack. You know, you'll now have to play on their structure. And it just is such an interesting, like, are you going to go difficult and make it so that they can't do their structure? Because if that's the case, then good luck if they actually are able to pull it off, because now you've got to deal with the hardest structure that you can. I really do think that all this different design has given me a lot to play with as I've been going. I've even had kids, and I've used this in my game group, as I discussed at the beginning of this episode, at the high school. I've had kids literally design their own games without even knowing that that was a potential for the design that the designers put into junk art. They give you cards that you can make into quote-unquote game types. And the idea is that you'll play several different game types in what I think refers to as a circuit. They refer to it as a circuit, and that means you're going to play this game type, you get this many points. Now play the next one, and then you play like 5 game types, and then at the end of that, you count up how many points there are. Well, I kind of consider every single game type its own separate game, just because, you know, to me it feels like it's its own separate thing. But really, junk art has captivated me as being an excellent stacking game where a lot of the different directions that a dexterity game could head have been explored, and it very much feels like a toolkit, a sandbox of several different types of stacking design. To me, it's the only stacking game that I need to own because it just has so much in it. It has so much content. It has so much directions it can head, and the base pieces of it, literally the nuts and bolts here, almost. Well, they're not exactly nuts and bolts, but their pieces are a difference in design. Like, they're not just squares and rectangles. Like, we're talking about pieces that involve every piece, I think, almost has one little aspect to it that makes it kind of difficult to stack. And that's what makes it so perfect. Even the rounded pieces in the game have other rounded pieces that are tailor-made to work with those pieces. So very much to me feels like an intentional, purposeful choice of pieces. I think that Tom Bassel's review that I watched ages ago when the game was first being announced did a good job of identifying that these pieces were very well selected. And all the different types of games that you can play with it makes it, to me, something that I am happy to own and feels like very much fills a niche. Not only fills a niche, it fills this niche and totally fills it. Totally fills it to the point where if another stacking game were to come out, I would doubt that I even have a place for it in my collection. So anyway, that's my thoughts on Junk Art. Do you gentlemen have any experience with it?
Yeah, Dylan. Yeah, I was the one who played with you at Gen Con, wasn't I?
Yes, you were.
Yeah, I think the two modes we played was like the speed version and that Montreal version. I vastly preferred the Montreal one.
Yeah, where you get to like actually choose the one to play on the person to your left.
Yeah, that was really interesting. I really liked that feeling of, do I give them some ungodly shape to stack? And then, oh no, but wait, what if they actually make it work and then I inherit that?
Yeah, that's definitely a big part of it. And I agree with you, Andy. The speed ones, to me, very much, especially with the fact that people bump the table, and when you've got 6 people around the table, that table gets bumped and somebody's structure falls down and they're like, I didn't even touch it. It's like, to me, the Montreal version, you know, the games that don't involve people rapidly grabbing things are much more like about the gameplay at its core and not about, you know, frantic forcing people into making poor decisions. So that can be kind of fun. I do feel like it just, because we live in a world that has gravity that makes this game possible, that same physical force can also result in a difficult play experience with the time constraints.
Yeah, I would say, you know, out of the dexterity games I've played, it's definitely very higher up there. There's only one that might slightly, I don't know, not replace it, but I would be wanting to own along with it, and that is I haven't played it, but I want to, is Bandu, or I think in the old one, Balzac's what it used to be called. And the reason why that one
Balzac, B-A-L-Z.
Yeah, I'm probably mispronouncing it, but
okay.
The reason I wanted to play that one is because it's a dexterity game with an auction element. So
what?
You could do different auctions with it, and basically, like, one of the styles is you put up a piece, and it's basically like, how much are you going to pay me to not have to take this piece and force me to deal with it? So you can put like some god awful thing up.
That's crazy. Like, you can literally auction off pieces to not take them, and so each person will have a different structure and be doing different things and expecting different things. Wow.
Right. And so like one of the pieces is just like a sphere. So you can just put that, so like, how much are you going to pay me to not have to stack this sphere on your thing?
Wow. That's funny. Well, any comments, Trent? Have you any experience with Junk Art? It seems like it'd be pretty well suited for a family environment that you sometimes play in.
I have not played it.
Okay. Cool one to check out. I don't know if I've been able to interest you at all, but do you guys play many dexterity games with your kids? I think you've mentioned Rhino Hero.
Rhino Hero, we have gone through periods where we have played tons and tons and tons of Pitch Car. Pitch Car is quite big here.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
we have a bunch of extra tracks and have taken over the entire living room with it.
Pitch car, you mean like 35 minutes of setup the game?
Yeah. But here's the thing: they enjoy the setup. The setup
Exactly. No, it's just like HeroScape.
Yeah, little kids.
HeroScape is really a largely, and miniatures games in general, man. Those guys will put so much time into like putting all the terrain in place. Very much so. Rewarding for them. So a little interlude here before we move on to our topic, and I explain to you guys what exactly I mean. Trent, I think that we've had a question posed in our chat that would be interesting for you to take on here. Nemo's War or Liberty or Death? Where to start?
That's a strange comparison. What is he wanting to start on?
Read into it.
My assumption is it's like where to begin with solo gaming.
That's an odd question. I would almost universally recommend Liberty or Death over Nemo's War for almost any purpose. Does that answer your question? I can't think of I'm trying to think of like scenarios in which I would say Nemo's War is your choice, but I'm not coming up with any. So there you go.
Fair enough, dude. All right. Well, yeah, I think the answer would be Liberty or Death. And I think in general, Trent, you've been quite rewarded by your solo play with that, if I remember correctly.
I have enjoyed the solo play of coin games. I think the coin system is better than the system used in Nemo's War. I will say that I like the theme of Nemo's War, and I think it's reasonably well implemented, and it does play solo. Probably as a solo system, the system for how it handles solo is better than that in Liberty or Death. But Liberty or Death is just flat out a better game. And if you have a group of 3 or 4, I just don't think I would ever play Nemo's War. So
yeah, it makes sense. So if you're just going solo and that's the only thing you ever plan on it for, then there's your scenario in which you choose Nemo's War.
And that's a maybe. I personally wouldn't, but that's because I love the theme of Liberty or Death. But I can see how if you were completely solo and the theme wasn't pulling you one way or another, I guess then maybe I would pick Nemo's War, maybe.
Okay. Isn't Nemo's War, from what I heard, kind of similar to some of those, some of the GMT games, the sub ones or something, where it's a lot more you kind of pick something and roll some dice to see how it kind of turns out?
Uh-huh. Very much so.
Yeah.
It's not real complicated. It's fun. They're just not real comparable games, I guess. Nemo's War is definitely lighter. Definitely lighter. That's like two things strange to compare, I guess. I'm not real sure about that one. For me personally, I would almost always choose Liberty or Death, almost regardless of the situation.
Now, coin games, by and large, are just really good solo, so...
Yep, whether you're using the flowcharts or just playing all the factions, they're good solo.
Mm-hmm.
All right. And I think you've mentioned before, Trent, that Liberty or Death is your favorite coin game, correct? Above Fire and Lake or any of the other ones?
Probably. But I mean, it's hard for me to say because I'm swayed by the theme. I like the Revolutionary War theme. Okay. I find that period in history very interesting. So thematically, I am attracted to it, and that probably helps me. It gives a bonus to that game because I'm already familiar with the setting. I'm familiar with what the cards are referencing as a historical context. And so that adds a lot to Liberty or Death for me. I don't understand what's going on in like Andean Abyss nearly as well. I don't understand what's going on in like any of the other coin games nearly as well. Yeah. I mean, I know generally the Vietnam War, like in some of the cards make sense, but I don't know the setting nearly as well. I don't know the details of a distant plane nearly as well. I mean,
it's interesting because I would be in the inverse of that. For me, Andean Abyss and Cuba Libre would be like pretty much where I made, where most of my experience historically would be.
But with Cuba Libre, did you even know what the Student Democratic group was about?
Before that?
Yeah.
I mean, I was familiar with the movement. I mean, but it was not the winner, so it's not something that you necessarily talk about a lot, especially since it wasn't really a major player. I think it really was almost like you can kind of see that the system needed a fourth player to sort of balance out the fact that there were these casinos that were, controlled or at least hand in hand with the government, and the pocketbooks. The government was pocketbooks of the casinos or whatever it is. Anyway, but I think that the student democratic one has a much more like kind of ambivalent relationship with the actual July whatever it was movement, and I think that I learned a lot during the game. But I think that's part of the thing that's interesting about them, though, is that you generally the backdrop, right, Trent? But then there are things that the game is still able to teach you.
Yeah, I guess for me, I sometimes had fun with Liberty or Death, trying to make, I guess for lack of a better way, trying to play out like an alternate history. Like some of the ones I've enjoyed the most had France winning. Like France essentially being the winner of the Revolutionary War. And in essence, the way I interpret that is that the United States essentially became a colony of France instead. I mean, I've had it where the Indians win. I don't even know how you interpret that, but
we had an interesting comment here. Just came from Jerry in our comments in our chat, and that was that when we're talking about this specifically with coin games, that maybe we shouldn't use the word theme. We should use the word topic. And honestly, like, where do we draw the line between games in which we should use the word theme and games in which we should use the word topic? Like, is anything historical now considered a theme? And if a game is kind of about a historical situation, is it then going to be, is it wrong to call it thematic? Is thematic a game that dungeon, fantasy players and sci-fi players have a stranglehold on, or is it something that historical wargamers would shun?
I think a lot of war games are probably very thematic to historical war gamers.
Would they call them thematic, though, or would they call them more topical?
And I'm going to drop a hint here. Are you ready? Are you ready, gentlemen?
Mm-hmm.
In the future, not all corn games are going to be strictly historical.
Oh, boy. Wow. That's kind of a bomb, Trent.
Yeah.
You feel kind of like you need to follow that one up.
I think I am okay saying that, but I would expect in a few years that they're going to be ahistorical coin games.
Wow.
Yeah, not historical.
Well, I suppose that was
coin,
kind of like...
Coin 40K coming to you.
Hopefully coin games are able to make the transition into, a fantasy and a non-historical setting better than Martin Wallace's system in A Few Acres of Snow was able to do. I still am curious as to why the choice was made to try to take that into a fantasy setting and not take it into other places.
And then into a sci-fi setting?
Mm-hmm.
No,
yeah, you just used the word setting, which was just suggested as a specific replacement maybe for theme as well. Like the setting of this game is sci-fi. The setting of it is this. So, can we just use those interchangeably? I mean, I think that, specifically when it comes to Euro games, people always talk about, oh, this is the theme in this. Or, when we're talking about thematic games, people are like, oh, it's all about theme. It's, this is a theme that comes across. I think that there's drama in a game, but drama isn't necessarily evocative of a theme. And that's our topic for today. The feels is what I've called it. Like what mechanisms are specifically evocative of the theme that they're supposed to be describing, evoking. I'm using the same word there. But the thing is, like, I wanted to specifically dedicate this episode to, like, kind of almost give little badges, little ribbons to the games that we think of that can be the best, have some of the best mechanisms where when you learn about that mechanism in the game, you think there is nothing else this could describe except for what it is thematically representing. Like, this specifically makes me think of what it is supposed to be doing. And I wanted to challenge myself to not just be like, okay, well, let me think of all my favorite games and the things I like about them and call them all evocative of theme. No. So one of the things I specifically wanted to mention is in a game that I pretty much can outwardly say that I loathe. It would be Eldritch Horror. but there are some elements to that game specifically that I think can create a very dramatic situation, and they can also be evocative of a theme. And for me specifically, it's the condition cards. Like, I think that when you pick up a condition and then you're not exactly sure what it is that you've been infected by something, but you won't know until the infection kind of runs its course what's going to happen. I think that's an example of a mechanism that's very evocative of the uncertainty that, to me, even happened in H.P. Lovecraft, where you would have somebody who would be sort of nursing something that they didn't realize was that bad, or in many cases maybe they did realize it was that bad, and it just ended up being a train wreck. I don't know, guys. That's kind of my example to get this kicked off. I want to hear from you guys, and I think, Andy, you're going to have some of the best comments here. What, Andy, is evocative of theme in your opinion? What do you think of as being like, this could only be this type of theme?
One for me actually is in one of still my favorite Euro games is the auction element of Three Kingdoms Redux. The auction representing the political will and strife of the game. So by doing this auction, you're basically exerting political influence to cause things to happen. And there's many times where I've been in those situations doing that auction. I mean, really feeling like a strategic advisor to some Chinese lord. Like, I got to send this guy out to do this because he's the one who will be able to sway and get the horses I need. And I don't know, like, I just can't imagine how else you would get that feeling other than with something like an auction, kind of that kind of setup. So I don't know, that one always feels like the mechanism and the theme works together. And I think for the longest time, I didn't understand Three Kingdoms Redux because I was thinking about it in terms of fighting battles rather than political conniving. And when you kind of put that political conniving spin on it, like, then the auction makes total sense.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Andy. That's a good game that brings that out for you. What I'm really interested to hear now is from Trent, because Trent, you run the gamut from every different type of game, and I really think that you, because of how all-encompassing your tastes are, might have a few things to say to enlighten me.
No, I can point you to one game that I think, hand down, the mechanics evoke the theme, and it's like the best for me, far and away, not even anything close, and that's diplomacy. Seriously, that sense of being in a room with 7 other people and you don't know who to trust is exactly how I think it would feel like to be in charge of a nation state in that time frame, or now. Think about it right now. Imagine the way that the United States and China and Russia and the EU all treat each other. They're effectively playing the game diplomacy.
Yeah, it is interesting. Definitely a diverse political climate, though. The question for you, Trent, have you ever heard of, or have you ever listened to, I'm sure you've heard of him probably, the Hardcore Histories by Dan Carlin?
Yep.
Okay. He did just tons and tons of hours, but it was all about starting from the very first kickoff of World War I and just talking about that entire political system, which is exactly what diplomacy is based in. And he talked about specifically how, like, it was Bismarck that had set up this entire complex system that required basically a genius intelligence like himself to be able to manipulate. And then by the time that World War I had, started to break out, like, Bismarck had nothing to do with German politics. And it was basically because this system was being almost like all of the kill switches, or I don't know if they say kill switches, but the
safeguards.
The safeguards, all of those things were being tested, and then all of the doomsday devices were all just essentially itching to be put into motion, because that, you know, the fact that these things is almost like a 7-way Cold War or a 6-way Cold War or 5-way, depending on how historians shake it up. In diplomacy, they have 7 different factions, but it just, I mean, I understand what you're saying. To me, though, the only thing I would say, Trent, is that there isn't really that many mechanisms in diplomacy. It's very much emergent, and it's very much more of a feel of just like the actual central gameplay involves that sort of double think back and forth. Like it's not a very mechanical feeling game.
I know, that's the beauty of it. The mechanics disappear because it's all about theme. It's all about negotiation. It's all about making sure that when the power grab happens, you're not the one getting the power grabbed from you. That, to me, that's the beauty of it. That's the beauty of the mechanics and diplomacy, is that it feels like diplomacy.
Yeah, certainly. I get what you're saying there. I get what you're saying. That's a very interesting perspective. I had no idea what direction you would go with this. I really didn't. Like I don't know. I thought you might go into territory of you know, some of the more thematic games that you play, like Mansions of Madness or something like that. But hearing diplomacy has almost thrown me for a loop. I'm not 100% sure exactly. I mean, I had a kind of a different anticipation of it. I feel like
there's no game I have ever played where I felt more like the people in the game, the roles in the game, than diplomacy. I felt like every time I play this, and I'm playing it seriously with people, I feel like legitimately I am negotiating for my livelihood. I'm negotiating for my life. I don't know whether to trust people. I don't know whether to trust that other nation state that's promising to be my ally. And that, to me, has got to feel like what I would imagine it being like with all of those states sitting there to boil right before World War I.
I agree, but I think that there's quite a bit that's being abstracted in the game, and I think that's where it throws me for a loop, is that like there's quite a bit more to the differences in each of these different countries' war machines in general. Like I think that there's quite a bit that just happens naturally based on the map, and just based on, you know, like Germany really, I mean, there's definitely things that come across. Like Germany is a country that absolutely, like if you, like when I played as Germany in our one game of diplomacy, and then I listened to Dan Carlin's Hardcore Histories, it was like, holy crap, man, this is exactly the way that I felt. Like when this broke out, when this war broke out, which, you know, might add that Germany was not necessarily the aggressor that started everything. It was actually like the Russians that decided to sort of side with the Serbs. And as soon as the Russians decided to side with the Serbs, the Germans were now basically pot committed to the Austrians, because now all of a sudden it took this like regional skirmish and just. And so the Germans were like, we're screwed, because everybody's all around us. And that definitely comes through. But I think there's quite a bit more to it. Like, not every country was balanced equally. And I think quite a bit of liberty has been taken by the designer to make it play 7 people, to make it play on the entire map of Europe. And I think that there's like, especially like Italy. Italy was a very minor player in World War I. And it definitely is one of the weaker players to play as, I think. But I still think, you know, the fact that Italy starts with a comparable size war machine and war force than everybody else involved is a little bit tough for me to get past the fact that I feel like I'm playing a game and not just in the environment like you're saying.
Well, I mean, to me, when you're saying a mechanic evokes something, to me, a mechanic evokes a feeling. And I can't think of a game mechanic that evokes feeling more than the combination of mechanics and diplomacy.
Yeah, absolutely makes sense. Absolutely makes sense. And I think I've expressed anything. For me, I was going to take it in a different direction, but I totally understand what you're saying, Trent. I get that at the core of diplomacy, the game mechanisms melt away, and I just feel the theme. I agree with that. What I was thinking of is kind of like more systems that are built up to that where like you play a game and you're like, oh my goodness, when this happens and this happens and the way that this behaves, it can only be that thing, if that makes any sense. and I feel like it can happen at a very like base feeling, like as small as in Mage Knight. When you flip over the Medusa tile, Medusa has a petrify effect. And, the petrify effect, Andy, do you think the petrify effect is pretty indicative of what Medusa would do to you?
Sort of.
Or paralyze. Paralyze.
Yeah. Sort of. I mean, it'll kill a minion outright, which is kind of what it's supposed to do, but it doesn't like kill your wizard outright, but it does knock them out, I think, or something like that. It's definitely one of the more annoying things to face, because if you can't get it blocked, it's gonna ruin your day.
Yeah, I think that the fact that it's like, if you get frozen, I feel like you're getting turned to stone. You now have to discard all of your cards. That's evocative of Medusa. She's going to turn you to stone unless you can block it. You have to block it, otherwise your turn doesn't happen. It's very much so like and it's almost like I'm given no choice. Like when I have the ability to make a choice about whether or not I'm going to block or take damage, does that almost take away a little bit of the evocative feeling of the game? If I'm able to choose to take damage like I can in Mage Knight, now does it no longer, like, do I no longer really have the impact? Like, especially if it's the last round of the game, like, who cares if you're taking damage in the last turn, because the game is over. You don't have to deal with any of the repercussions of that. So I think that there are ways that mechanisms can evoke a theme in that aspect. I also feel like, just in general, like a game like Steampunk Rally, there's very few games to me that feel so much like slapping together a machine, seeing how it works, and then getting as far as you can on it, and then taking damage and just shedding these pieces off your machine. That to me is just extremely evocative of this feeling of like throwing everything together, almost like Galaxy Trucker, except I'd say that I even prefer it to Galaxy Trucker, because whenever a game totally wrenches control from me, like it does in Galaxy Trucker, when this asteroid's coming here, like, to me it's tough to evoke much. Is that a limitation that I have, guys? Is that something that I should be able to get over? Is that something where a lot of people will feel that because you have no control over this, it is evocative of a theme?
Yes. No, but I mean legitimately, like, depending on what kind of theme you're going for. So, like, another thematic game for me is a lot of the Phil Eklund science-based games. Greenland, Neanderthal, Bios Megafauna, Megafauna 2. A lot of the mechanisms in those games do represent real aspects of nature. And, like, being that I have my background in biology, I understand what's going on with it, and that the mechanisms are perfectly linked for that. But because they are linked to nature, nature often has very chaotic, random seeming events. And those tend to kind of burn you the wrong way. Usually, Joe, you don't like that, that, okay, I roll dice. You made wonderful decisions, but yeah, I'm sorry. A meteor hit the tile you were on. And I'm not saying that's a weakness. I'm just saying that's a play style you prefer. And some thematic games do inherently use random in that way, because life can be seemingly very random at times.
Absolutely. I have a question for you, and I want to hear from Trent here first in the answer, since I haven't heard from him in a minute. And this is based on a comment that I just saw. All right, so I'm going to give you guys two different hypothetical game settings, and I want you to tell me which one you think is more evocative of theme. In one setting, let's talk about the game Survive. In the game Survive, you have all these different tiles, and the tiles are different thicknesses in the Stronghold Games edition, but I don't think that was necessarily always the case with all the productions in the old Survive that came out, decades ago. Anyway, you are forced to remove all the tiles from the beach first, because these are like the lower lying areas. you are able to choose which of the beaches you want to remove, with I think a limitation here or there, but they're basically like you have to remove one of the beaches. You get to choose which one. You're able to choose basically where, but it gives you sort of like a random effect on the other side that you're not really in control of. Anyway, you are able to choose where you remove the tile from, so here's the other, that's situation A, right? That's game A. Is that more evocative of the theme of an island sinking than game B? And let me describe that. Game B has the same exact situation where you've got different tiles, and so all of the sand tiles must be removed before you can then go on to the next altitudes, which is going to sink down, and then finally you end with the mountains as everything finally slowly sinks into the sea. However, in this system, on a player's turn, they roll dice, and then based on the dice they roll, the tile is kind of decided for them because you couldn't say exactly what was going to flood. It's more evocative of a theme, or are they both equally evocative, and it's just a design choice? Trent?
Okay. So let's be clear. Are you saying which one do I think is more evocative, or which one sounds more interesting to me?
Both. First answer the first one first, though. Answer the evocative question first.
I think they're about the same. I got to vote for survive.
Okay, you think that just the ability to choose is they're about the same evocative wise?
I always end up on the side of choices, I guess, for lack of a better way of putting it.
Sure.
That almost always, having choices and having things to worry about makes games feel more thematic to me. And no matter what the theme is, I'm drawn more in when I feel like I have choices that are different and compelling, and I have things to worry about. The more a game does that to me, the more I can buy into the theme of it, almost no matter what the theme is. Because I feel like if I'm not under some sort of pressure and I'm not worried about something, then I'm playing Candyland and I don't care.
An interesting statement, and one that I can very much echo. Andy, how about you? What do you think about this?
I don't know. I think in a lot of ways they both work. It depends on, I guess, what the feeling the designer was going after.
Let's say that they both wanted the same thing. They both wanted you to make you feel like you were on a sinking island.
I don't know. In that case, I would probably go more on the style of tiles, but I mean, it could be either one.
But I mean, the style of tiles is kind of the same in both. In one of them, players get to choose a tile, and the other one, players roll dice, and the tile is chosen for them because you don't get to control where the water goes.
Yeah. I would say probably. Actually, in that case, I might go neither. I don't know.
What? You can't do that, Andy. It's an A or B. You can't say neither.
Andy goes home from this game night.
Yep.
He walks out.
No, but what I'm talking about legitimately is if you're trying to come up with a theme for the idea of flooding, right?
Sure.
Neither at that point.
Well, I don't think not flooding, like submerging.
Okay. So as I say, if you're talking flooding, then like completely random does little sense as choosing, because flooding follows a very predictable route from high to low, filling up basins first. And so, that neither one would make sense to me in that situation. But
sure,
if we're talking submerging,
well, I think we had an interesting comment about that like you should make a topographical map of your island after a game of Survive to show, like which were exactly the lowest lying beaches and so on. So, I mean, there's definitely a way maybe you could have it so that the game has divided it even further into like, this is tile number 1, this is tile number 2, and then you're forced to choose them in that order. What do you guys think about that? I mean, that's
if you're actually if you're collapsing and you're wanting to mimic the event you're talking about, yeah, that's the better way to do it. I don't know if that's probably not better gameplay wise.
No, that sounds awful, man. That sounds like turn order determines what actions you get, but
right. And so the
or maybe
question,
what it would be is it would be that there's like there's 4 tile 1s and we each get a different tile 1, but now then it goes up a level. But then it's just like, where do you decide? You know, like the game has already made a distinction that here the sand is going to go before the forest going to go before the mountain. Is that I mean, that's enough of a distinction now that like is it okay for that choice to happen? And I guess that like the evocative mechanism is already there, right? I mean, and people can visibly see that the lower lying lands are the beaches, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that, you know, I was trying to use that to illustrate, guys, that when I play a game and I'm given no choice over something, I'm given no control, I'm left feeling like I feel like there was some sort of a way that this could have, without necessarily losing any sort of how much the theme evokes, the mechanism evokes the theme, that there could have been some sort of a gameplay improvement. I feel like there's not really been many times when I've specifically looked at the fact that I had no control over an outcome and thought, well, that just feels like theme. But I have a pretty big, I guess, experience to recount here, and it's almost going to count as maybe the closest thing to a review as I'll ever make of the game in question, and that's Navajo Wars. I just played a solo game of Navajo Wars, and Andy might know where I'm going with this because Andy has you know, he saw that I was playing Navajo Wars, kind of texted me like, hey, how's it going? And I just kind of like used Andy as a bit of like a shoulder to cry on. But it was like, before the game even started, I had the Pueblo had revolted, which is a good thing to happen, but when it happens that early, it just basically means the Spanish are going to crush them before I have any time to build up my own, you know, like they're not going to distract the Spanish, essentially. The whole function of the Pueblo is that they're this larger group that the Spanish were distracted by, that the Navajo, which was actually relative newcomers to the area, then could kind of get collected a little bit. And the thing is, since the Pueblo revolt happened so early, I was just basically getting hit left and right with the Spanish getting extra actions and becoming stronger. And I was just like, man, they are getting so strong so fast. There's nothing I can do. And then I ended up getting hit by 2 ceremony cards in a row, which ceremony cards are good effects as long as you don't ever get another ceremony card when you're holding one. So getting 2 in a row is like, instantly bad. And I felt like, you know, I had a man die from a family, and I had no control over this happening. It was just like, flip the card, see what happens. I went to go try to raid the New Mexico to try to get some of their livestock, which 11 of the 15 cubes are all supposed to be positive benefits for me that will actually hold the enemy at bay a little bit when they take their actions. They're going to be a little bit scared by how powerful I've come off and how much raiding I'm doing. But everything that I did was just like raiding to make them stronger and make me worse, because I drew statistically unlikely these things that would really, really hurt me. And so ultimately, I felt like I was going extinct, and there was very little that I could do about it. I felt like this world is hostile to the point that I can't, using anything the game is allowing me to do, I can't really do anything about this, and the game's horrible. And I felt like if that's what this game is trying to evoke, it's worked. But at the same time, like, just the amount of potential for this to happen to me, just like, what exactly is this trying to evoke, guys? And Trent, you have played both Navajo Wars and Comancheria and many other solo games. If you were to have an experience in a solo game where, you know, the game became basically impossibly difficult right at the beginning, like in that case, like, what is, and I don't mean to, like, I don't want to derail this into, like, should games, you know, difficulty be specifically intentionally set, but, like, there were so many different things that were happening that seemed to me, quote unquote, what people would call thematic, but at the same time, like, it's tough. It was tough for me, like you had mentioned earlier, to invest it all when I felt like I had no choice. As soon as anything happened, like the fact that I had no choice or impact over the outcomes necessarily, that, you know, like the swing between a good effect and a bad effect was so huge, and I was getting so many bad effects in a row that I felt just kind of like, well, this is evocative of me being terrible at every goal that I set. Anyway, Trent, having knowledge of Navajo Wars, what do you think about that?
I don't necessarily think that a very, very difficult situation or even an unwinnable situation is inherently unthematic, because sometimes life deals you unwinnable situations. I think Andy would somewhat appreciate that because he likes simulation style games. Sometimes simulation style games hand you unwinnable situations. That's part of life. I actually don't necessarily think that's a bad thing for being evocative of a theme, because I kind of think like the Native Americans often had no-win situations.
Well, that's kind of what Navajo Wars is ultimately supposed to make you feel, is the unbelievable hopelessness and sadness that those native tribes faced when dealing with American and Spanish and Mexican, coming into their territory. Yeah, I mean something like that happened in Comancheria to me too, where like, I basically drew like a disease card and then an epidemic card, right? They wiped out my troops right at the time where a large army came right in and then basically just wiped me off the map. And I'm like, at the time, it kind of did feel evocative of the theme to me. I'm like, so basically, this must be that period in history where someone's like, hey, take all these blankets for the winter that, we had people rolling with smallpox in or something. Like, no, it legitimately made me feel that way, because I'm like, that's what happened. Like, the tribes and native peoples were wiped out by disease as much as anything else, and that's exactly what happened to me.
Huh. So you got that sort of like historical equivalent, that historical topical information that helped you out. I think for me, when a game has that sort of like, rolling your D1, your critical failure, it's almost like for me to really be able to see how that, I think that it can be done in a design where there's just like so many different randomness things happen, where it's just happening all the time and it happens once every now and then and it can feel like this big old swing, yay. But I feel like I almost wanted a person who's very knowledgeable in the topic to be able to tell me what exactly was happening, like what kind of a thematic equivalent is this? I wanted a DM. I wanted a dungeon master. I wanted somebody to be running, quote unquote, my RPG and tell me, like this is what's happened. And so that way I'm able to follow this story, because for me, I was thinking so much in mechanisms of the game because I'm sitting there invested in trying to make this work and trying to achieve a victory. And I felt like just not even able to invest in the experience and not able to see, I was trying to see how is this evocative of the theme. And here's one interesting way that I came up with. I mean, like I had elders, and every elder can take an action, but you have to roll a die to see if the elder succeeds or fails. And you start the game with very young elders that are only able to succeed on rolls of 1 or 2, at least in this scenario that I played. So I'm literally like planning an action, knowing full well that I'm probably not going to get to do it. Guess what, guys? I rolled 3 dice. Guess how many elders succeeded for me?
None.
Correct.
3.
You got it, Andy. None of my elders succeeded.
Should have got better.
All of them failed. So I like had planned actions, and I was like, okay, well, I'm going to do this. All right, let's see if I succeed. Nope. Okay, well, let's try with the next elder. Nope. Okay, well, I guess we'll still try that same thing. Try the next elder. Nope. Fail. And to me, like asking a player to plan something and then still consult a chart, still consult some sort of an RNG, I cannot feel that evoking theme for me. I guess here's what came across. It's not that I cannot feel that evoking theme. I can't invest in the experience. I'm sorry. I misspoke. I can feel an evoking theme. Here's the way that I felt. I felt that I had a tribe that was incredibly terrible at picking targets to raid. Like, as in, every time I picked a target, all I did was essentially just kick a hornet's nest and then watch them swarm me. And then when my elders noticed how dumb I was, when my 3 elders noticed how dumb I was, they had such little influence on my tribe because of how young they were that they just basically got blown off one after the other. And then when one of my males died and I had this fatherless family that was just consistently unable to do anything militarily, I just felt kind of like I was like an animal that was in, like, you know, run away in fight or flight. Well, flight's the only thing I could do. So were all those things evocative of themes, guys? I think so.
Mm-hmm. I would agree.
I would too. I would agree too.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, to compare that here to a comment that we had about This War of Mine, a game that I just got to play for like the very first time, like I feel like This War of Mine was able to do that same sort of thing, that same sort of like, well, I'm rolling dice and seeing, you know, how these things happen, but it was able to really immerse me much more in its story, its system. Like, its same evocative, quote-unquote, systems, evocative game mechanisms are accompanied by at least some sort of a stand-in for a GM or a DM in this sort of like book of encounters, book of where you never know exactly what direction you're going to take. They're all kind of narrative written out. And considering that I was entering the game of This War of Mine for the express purpose of an evocative game about the horrors of war from a civilian perspective, it was something that I was very much delivered. In Navajo Wars, I thought, you know, this is a game that seems to have a victory condition and a, you know, like, I guess it's the same as Navajo Wars has a victory condition, the same as This War of Mine, only in Navajo Wars, a lot of the storytelling of the game is left to the mechanisms. And when those come across like that, I feel like I want something just a little bit more to bring me along on the story. And I guess that your knowledge of the thing, like Andy, I feel like you really enjoy these science games because you have this much background knowledge. Trent, would you say that for you it's kind of similar with history?
Yeah, I think that the more I know about a game's background, I think the more I enjoy the theme and the more the mechanisms are going to make the theme come to life. It's because I'm essentially drawing on the background knowledge in my head, making the game come to life. When I'm less familiar with the theme, it's harder to do that. I mean, if I don't know anything and don't care about the theme, there's not much to evoke. It's not going to feel exciting to me.
Can a mechanism... I'm sorry.
I guess that's why I like abstracts, because it doesn't even bother with that and goes straight to mechanisms, and I don't have to worry about it.
Yeah. That's an interesting... Yeah, I know how much you love abstracts, and that's an interesting comparison to draw. What about a game that's able to evoke a theme from people totally unfamiliar with its subject matter? Do you think that's only going to ever be superficial? Examples, okay? Examples, something for you guys to go off of. What about the concept of like planting a grain into the ground in Agricola, right? Planting a grain into the ground. What does it do for you? Well, you're losing a grain right now, but now you're going to get it back when you harvest it, right? But you're not just going to get it back, you're now going to get more stuff back, right? Like just this investment of time, of resources, and then now you're getting it, but it's sort of like out of it. It's not out of your control so much as dictated by the game when you're going to get this back. Is that able to be evocative of the theme? Is you know, just the idea of as simple as I do something now, 2 turns from now, I get this because it's farming. You know, like I know very little about farming. I was, you know, my soybean in 3rd grade like died. It died. Everybody else's grew nice and big, and my soybean died. I'm saying I suck at farming.
That's right. I'm a biology major and suck at farming.
What do you think, Trent? Can that be evocative as well, or does it require the background knowledge?
Well, I
Does it
think
require a GM?
I think a good game can teach a little bit about the theme, but I think there has to be a certain amount of buy-in from. I'm gonna put it this way: if I know something about a theme already in advance, that means I enjoy the theme and have some independent interest in it. And I don't think like necessarily a game sitting down and you know nothing about the theme means that you probably didn't have a lot of pre-existing interest in it.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think a game can make you want to feel the theme that much. I think it's going to come from you, not from the game.
Interesting. Yeah. How subjective is it?
I think it's pretty subjective on that one. I think, and the other thing, the difference I think between thematic historical games and then this War of Mine, the one you're talking about, Joe, with that is a lot of the GMT or war games or whatnot. They're very thematic, but they are meant to do one of two things: either allow you to play within the background knowledge, so it behooves you to research the topic ahead of time, or what they're trying to do is get you interested to go back and look it up on your own. A lot of these games have design notes that tell you what to actually go read or look at to understand what's going on in their game. Or, hey, if you want to learn more about what was going on with this situation, go look at this. There's even, like at times, almost like, a bibliography of sources or a works cited page sometimes on these things. Whereas a game that's doing it through more storytelling is, just trying to bend you into the story. So that's where they include things like flavor text and whatnot.
Absolutely. I think for me, when I think of evocative mechanisms, it's almost like they're like the little flavor things that have made a game system that obviously I'm entertained by more robust. So I'm not necessarily going into it with a lot of pre-knowledge. Like I think about StarCraft and Forbidden Stars even, like the way that these games have these little, like the cards that you play, like there will be a card that is your scouts, and that seems to have what to me feels like an evocative mechanism that feels like this is your unit that is meant to somehow predict what your opponent's going to do. Maybe it forces your opponent to play their card face up, and then you get to react to it, where normally you place them both face down. Does that make any sense, guys? Like these little effects that I find in the game really evoke that theme for me. They're the mechanism that evokes the theme that I see. And then there's other games where the entire system, like you mentioned, Trent, like you mentioned with Diplomacy, to me, two games that really evoke their theme through their game mechanism, the whole system, it would be Modern Art and then the Dream Factory. Because the Dream Factory, Trent, all those auctions are paid out to other players to show how in Hollywood everybody has a piece of everything, right?
Yep. I mean, the same is true in modern art, yeah.
In modern art, yeah, the value of paintings is largely determined by the actual studios, the actual sellers of the paintings themselves, by how much they sort of almost collude together to make this painting more sought after. It's almost like marketing 101, but just how it's done in this highbrow modern art setting.
Yep, I completely agree. I'll say I find the art on the new version of modern art helps with that.
Mm-hmm.
It's
come on, Trent, don't you want to go back to light metal?
No, I don't. Actually, I actually picked up the new one because got a problem with Kinesia games from that era, and I took the old one and put it in our camping box. So we have a camping box we just keep in our pop-up camper, and now it's in there.
Nice. So that way that one can kind of get quote unquote camped with, and
yeah, it'll get beat around, but you know what? I have a nice copy at home, and that's okay. We can light metal jokes when we're camping.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that I don't know. Like to me, it helps that it looks cool, but at the same time, it almost makes me think like, oh, this is art that I'm selling, and not so much just like, what is this? And I feel like it's almost like this manipulative studio, like art studio owner that's going to be telling me, oh, no, don't ignore this one. You need to pay attention to this. You know what I mean? And like, it's almost like when you're deciding together that this artist is worth attention, and then the artist's paintings sell for more, it almost, to me, because when I see the art in the new version, I'm like, no, this actually looks like nice and interesting, and it makes me want to like continue to look at it. Like it's not like light metal where
Like, what the hell?
Yeah, what the hell is this?
Light metal is okay. If you've never seen this version of modern art, it's like the early '90s version, and the art for light metal is like a photograph that somebody used the Photoshop emboss filter on, and that's all it is.
Yeah, there isn't really any content to it. It's just it's almost like a bad negative of something.
Yep, that's exactly a description.
So yeah, anyway, there's many different ways that I think mechanisms can evoke a theme. I think that you can be sold on a game system, on a game mechanically, and you start to see, I think this is what I mainly do, I start to see the nice little flavor touches, like a sprinkle of seasoning. Whereas the entire game, I make all these concessions that are not like to appreciate the game for the game system's sake, that have nothing to do with evoking a theme. However, I see the theme there in the little tiny bits. And that's one way to appreciate a theme that I specifically think that I do quite a bit. Whereas Trent, you mentioned, and I'm really glad you brought that up, because I hadn't considered, like modern art and Dream Factory as being like, no, it's almost like the thesis of this game is to specifically show you this economic system and to evoke it in its mechanisms. That's exactly what it is. To me, it's a totally different thing. And then for things like on the level of Phil Eklund at GMT, where you come into it with just this big background of knowledge and want to see how this designer has specifically treated it, that's a whole nother plane, I think, a whole nother plane. So evocative mechanisms can be found in a lot of different places. I think that it's been an interesting discussion. I think that it was some really good user comments too here, not user comments, viewer or listener comments that I've really been entertained by listening to. So anyway, guys, that's about all I have to say about this. Anybody's final comments?
Go play a coin game.
Yeah. Coin game.
Very much so. We're a Phil Eklund game, Andy?
Yes.
Okay. All right, well, let's get on the hype train here, guys, and let's kick her off with a game that is probably going to evoke a theme, and it's probably going to be a theme that many people might be on one side of an issue or another about. Whose turn is it?
I don't know who you're talking about. I'm going to guess me.
Yes.
Okay, so I'm going to talk about a game that's coming out in the it's not clear, but it looks like it's 2018. It's from a Hollandspiel, and it's basically broaching on the subject of slavery. It's basically imagine a game that is a lead up to the Civil War, except rather than like being like a war game or anything like that, it's all about the slavery, the political aspects of slavery.
Mm-hmm.
The South defending the principle, the North being generally abolitionist, and then there's a mechanism that's kind of the reconciliators, the people kind of that were trying to just keep the Union together and didn't really have a moral horse in the game. It's coming out from Hollandspiel 2018. When I originally read the description of it, I thought it was going to be more along the line of Twilight Struggle, but then the designer actually said no, it is mechanically different. And the thing is, when you see the box art for this, you're going to go like, it's pretty intense. It shows the back of a slave with very large scars from being whipped is the box art, and it's like an old-time photograph. The game is called This Guilty Land, and I got to give Hollandspiel credit for taking on a very challenging theme, especially right now in our current political moment. it's a very risky call, and I gotta believe. I have a feeling there's going to be more blowback against this than there might. If it gets any attention at all, there will be some blowback. I think it's a very risky theme. I hope that he is portrayed well. I have seen other Hollandspiel games in the past. They've treated their themes with a lot of respect. I don't think this will be any different, but boy, it's quite a theme.
Yeah. Like almost like 12 Years a Slave, the board game.
Yeah.
Well, and Hollandspiel, I mean, they haven't really like shown any reluctance to not tackle these like dark themes. I mean, you got an Infamous Traffic, which is, you know, opium dealers. You're playing drug dealers essentially. What other ones? Lots of war ones too. Yeah, I mean, I guess they don't shy away from that, and that's kind of cool. I mean, it's nice to see a company take risks. But yeah, that one's maybe skirting an edge of a boundary, so it'll be interesting to see for sure.
Yeah, I think that how similar will it be to Freedom the Underground Railroad? You guys think?
I don't think it'll be anything like it.
Yeah, I think the description, it sounded like, I can't remember if I heard this somewhere. The description I heard of is it'll be in the similar vein of the one I had talked about with the Roman Senate there a couple episodes ago, except it's supposed to be a little heavier than that, so more complexities with it.
Okay.
So it sounds like it'll be like more of a struggle in the sense of like, you know, trying to gain certain voting blocks and whatnot and sway public opinion your way. Most of the Hollandspiel games I've read the rules to and played, they're all the one common thing for me seems to be the game's about a delicate dance. It's like I push a little here, I pull a little here, and then like they all kind of feel that like once you start doing well, it's kind of a landslide to the finish kind of thing. So a lot of their games seem to be like, you have to think about countering what I'm going to do. And if you let me get away with it, like this game's going to be over fast.
Sure. Well, that sounds quite interesting.
I'm just intrigued by the gutsiness of the theme more than anything.
Yeah.
Plus, I have faith in the designer and the publisher, so we'll see.
Cool. All right. Well, sounds interesting. Yeah, that's This Guilty Land. Can be coming out sometime fairly soon from Hollandspiel. And next up, let's hear from me. Why don't I invite myself here to tell you guys about the third version of Unlock that I am going to be playing within the next week. It is the Island of Dr. Goorse, and it'd be my third experience with the Unlock game because I have played the first two. Thank you so much to David.
That's the one I've actually played, is the one you're going to play.
Okay.
So I'll try not to spoil anything.
No, I don't think you will. I've heard that there's some really screwed up rules for teams that the game kind of forces players into from the very first card, I might add. And I did just take a look at the setup card, just to kind of read like the premise. And what I read online was one user comment was, I hate the new team thing, rated a 1. And then later on down the line, I saw somebody rate it a fairly decent rating, either a 7 or an 8, and say, ignore the team play and just play it like normal. It's a good escape chamber. It's a good Unlock edition as long as you just ignore this silly mechanism that they shouldn't have ever tried in the first place. So you're not supposed to be able to talk with one another. It's just kind of weird. Doesn't seem to me like in the spirit of an Unlock chamber, but I guess there are some where you separate groups into different people and then kind of force people into share to at least eventually get together and be able to share information they've seen in the past. So anyway, Trent, what is your thinking about the future of Unlock in terms of, or not the future of Unlock, but what do you think my future of Unlock will hold in terms of playing this Island of Dr. Goorse?
I was not bothered at all by the team mechanic. It was like, well, that's a different way to approach. I mean, it was different, but it didn't really bother me that much. I don't know whether you'll like it or not. I didn't think it was that big of a deal. So
I might be playing it with only like me and my wife. So in that case, we'll probably just have to ignore it because, yeah, I don't think we want to be a team of one each. You know, I guess, I don't know. We might try it and see. So based on your recommendation, Trent, I might at least give it a shot. But I definitely will not be married to the idea of it like I am to my wife. So if we need to, we will not keep going with it. So, but I appreciate that input. So I'm very excited for Unlock the Island of Dr. Goorse. I'm really looking forward to doing a video review of the Unlock series, which will be happening at some point. I really wanted to play this version first, and I also feel like I need to play some of the other Unlock, type games like Exit and maybe some other escape rooms in a box before I can really do a video review. But anyway, that's my hype game right now is one that I had to really stop myself from just totally playing alone this afternoon after it came in from Amazon. Unlock the Island of Dr. Goorse. Andy, tell us about a game that sounds like it could be about anything.
Actually, it's another Hollenspiel game too. So
okay, well that could have maybe been titled a little bit more conspicuously, a little bit more specifically, Table Battles.
Yep. So this is I think it's the newest release by Hollenspiel, and the way this is being billed is it's a war game filler. So it takes 15, 20 minutes to play. You play it in between. It's a 2-player one. What's kind of cool is that it basically is really expandable. So it's one of those initial, you get the box it's in and you're like, you could have fit this in a box way smaller. But the deal is they're planning on coming out with a lot of expansions for it. And so what you do
is Hollenspiel expansions? Is this their first game that they're going to be expanding?
Kind of, yeah. It's basically because here's what it is you get a deck of cards, and the cards are units and battles. So you pick a battle, it tells you which units to put in it. You've got some wooden sticks of various colors that represent your health. You've got a few dice. And some cubes, and they're used in various ways in this system. So it's a system that you can put in a lot of battles. Now, what's kind of cool about this is it's actually a dice game. So each player gets 6 dice. You roll your dice, and then your units have different ways of activating their abilities. So it might be if you put a pair on this unit, you can activate its special ability. If you put 1 dice on this one, you can do that or whatever. What makes this kind of interesting, though, is in a lot of these dice battle games, it's I roll my dice and then I take actions with them immediately, right? But this one doesn't. Your actions are delayed by a round. So you take actions, then you roll your dice, which will become your actions next round. And so what ends up happening then is, like I said, a lot of the Hollenspiel games have this back and forth, this dance. And so I can see where you put your dice. Okay, how am I going to respond to that? Okay, you saw me respond to that. Are you going to still execute that plan, or are you going to pull some dice off and re-roll them and try something else? Which kind of represents setting up for a battle. In some of these old style battles, it's okay, that's how they're setting up our battle line. Okay, we'll move our troops over here. Let's put some horsemen on the wings, and oh crap, they see us doing that, so now they're countering with this, and oh god, the hell with it, just go for it. And so certain units can only attack certain units in the game. So and there's some that are, for example, very aggressive, so they can only attack a certain unit, and if that unit is routed, they leave the game. So they were routed out of the game. But then this particular unit that did the routing also has pursuit, which means they just run off the battlefield chasing them, and you lose your unit at the same time. So you can win by usually each scenario has a win condition, and then you can also win by basically busting the morale up of your enemy. And so it's just interesting. It's this really quick little dice game, except it has that little twist of you play your dice at the end of the action phase, which is what you're going to do next, and your opponent can see that and plan accordingly. rather than your normal, I roll dice, I do these things with them. Okay, your turn.
Mm-hmm.
And so that, I'm kind of hoping it fits into that category of thinky filler, and it'll be interesting to see what it comes with. Right now, it's got 8 different battles in it, I think, if I remember right. But other than that,
what is some of the battles? So what would be 1 or 2 of the battles that are included?
They range quite a bit. There's some from like Civil War. There's some from medieval times. And that's the thing with expanding it is the gist I get is how they expand this is they just print more decks of cards and you put them right in the box. And that's kind of where they said this is going to be, yes, it's a big box. That's on purpose because we plan on releasing a lot of expansions for this over the next couple of years. Do I think it's going to be like the super deepest game ever? No, not really. But if it turns out to be a quick little filler that has some interesting decisions and that's what it's billing itself as, then hey, it could be really good.
Yeah, absolutely, dude. Well, thanks, Andy. That is Table Battles. Just so interesting that that's from Hollandspiel, because I was like, man, that sounds like an expandable miniatures game, which is so strange because it's an expandable game, but it's from a company that you wouldn't expect that from. So very interested to see exactly what that's going to be the case. But it sounded a little bit maybe like what's the game? Ashes, Rise of the Phoenix Born?
Yeah, just like this kind of gives me a feel of sort of one of those dueling-y card games. But it's not really, because all your cards are on the table right at the beginning. It's really more of a dice game, but it's kind of a dueling dice game.
Yeah. Very interesting. Well, thank you so much, Andy, for sharing that. And that brings us to a close of this episode of The Good, the Bored, and the Ugly. I hope that you guys all, once again, if you're still listening to this, please support The Good, the Bored, and the Ugly by supporting everybody who's in need of help right now in Houston and in Florida, and not just in Houston, obviously all around Texas and Florida. Anybody who's been impacted, please donate to the Red Cross, and do that. If you love this content, do that for us, please. Please have a great week of gaming as well. I'm your host, Joe Sallin. I've been joined tonight by
Andrew Dennison,
Trent Ham,
and we will catch you guys next week here on The Good, the Bored, and the Ugly.